welcome to episode 11 of our FM COVID-19 webinar series. We're excited to bring an expert panel to talk about the future office today. And before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. So everybody has been muted for audio purposes. We will also have a Q&A session towards the end of the session where we invite you to drop your questions into the GoToPanel question box so that the expert panelists can answer those. And then this episode and a full recording with the slide deck, as well as all past episodes, is available on our Coronavirus Resource Center. So with that, let me turn it over to Ray, who will be moderating today's session. Ray?
Well, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's out there. It's a delight to have all of you here. Certainly, there's been a lot of dialogue out there across our industry for, quite frankly, a rather long period of time as we've been dealing individually and, of course, as a community around the current crisis. Today, we've got an amazing group of people pulled together where we're going to talk, and quite frankly, we want to really maybe shift the dialogue a little bit from what seems to be a lot of challenge out there to really a look forward. And quite frankly, when we think about what's been happening, the concept of optimism is probably not the thing that originally came to our mind. But now that we are really seeing this light at the end of the tunnel, if we want to use that phrase, what we wanted to do is bring a group together and to think about and to really hear what some of the leaders in our industry are thinking as their organizations are driving through the end of the impacts of the pandemic and really looking at what happens next. And what happens next could be the beginning of a series of unbridled creative exercises. So I'm delighted to have with me today 4 people. Now, we unfortunately are having a little bit of technical challenge, so 2 of those people are currently not on screen, but rest assured they are here with us, certainly both in spirit and then also in body. So first, actually, we have Armin Vartanian, who is the Senior Vice President, Global Workplace Services at Okta. We also have with us Mr. John Vasquez, who is also Senior Vice President and Global Head of Real Estate and Supply Chain at Verizon. We also have Laura Guido-Clark, who is the CEO of an organization called Love Good Color, PBC. And then also Mary Lee Duff, who is a Principal and Senior Director of Strategy at IA Interior Architects. Each of our panelists is going to take a short time to talk about their own personal view of this particular topic. And then we're going to engage and hopefully have an incredibly lively discussion around what this really means for us, both again, as organizations, as providers, and then also, quite frankly, just as humans. So Armin, I would love if you had the opportunity now to hopefully, since you're here technologically with us, to go ahead and kick us off.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm first off very excited and honored to be on this panel and speaking to you all today. I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe during these, unprecedented times. For me, one of the things that I think about is how drastic some of the change has been, not only from a workplace perspective, but impacting the day-to-day lives of all of us in some form or fashion. And with that change and chaos brings a bunch of uncertainty. And I think it's easy to, have some anxiety or mental stress around that amount of change so quickly when we are creatures of habit. I think, if you think about like Mark Zuckerberg wearing a hoodie every single day or wearing the same types of clothing, it's about minimizing the changes on a day-to-day basis so that we can focus on a smaller number of things and do those things better. And so one of the things that I've expressed to my teams over the past few months is that structure is incredibly important in trying to adapt to this new normal. And that structure is, it's important for 2 reasons. One, it allows us to kind of focus on a smaller number of things, quicker by developing that structure. But then 2, by enabling that structure, you can now focus on the opportunities that the change has brought on. And I think that's a very powerful and optimistic message that we should be delivering to the people that not only we work with, but also that we are kind of socialize with on a daily basis. So that opportunity for us at Okta has been primarily driven by this initiative we call dynamic work, which is effectively changing and rethinking the way we design and drive our workforces around the world. And so specifically, that is moving to a work from anywhere type of initiative where we have our employees moving to markets where they don't necessarily live today because they're not centered around an office location. It enables the company to hire in markets where we don't have offices, thus expanding our talent pool. But it really is about enabling our people from wherever they are. And, I think that's a really powerful thing for any organization to kind of adapt and change to in this new normal going forward, because that enablement will drive a greater engaged employee base, thus creating more productivity and better business results. So I'll talk a little bit more about dynamic work as we go through this presentation and how the team has adapted to shift our focus to that.
All right. So actually, I think, Chris, we're a little bit behind in the presentation. That's all right. We can push forward to John. It's so funny, guys. There's so many of these wonderful opportunities out there to continue dialoguing, and we've participated in so many. But at the end of the day, we're all human, aren't we? We've got to make sure that these things work. So, Chris, I appreciate that. John, I'd love to turn it over to you and hear a little bit about Verizon. Well, actually, let's just call it John's view on optimism.
Thank you. So welcome and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Let's go to the next slide, please, because I think it's what's a good thing to do is just to talk about kind of where we are. Next slide, and what we're doing. This evolution to new normal. So what I've given here just to look at is kind of the approaches being taken to what does the workplace look like for us for at least the next, I would say, 12 months, and then we can debate how long that's going to be, but at least through the end of this year. And we think about our opportunity to lead in a crisis. How do we help our companies manage this very emotional and psychological response to workplace, with all the questions out there as to whether it's coming back or it's gone forever. I'm of the opinion it is not gone forever. I'm of the opinion it's probably more important going forward than it probably has ever been. And if you look at some of the components as to what we're doing initially to prepare work, to return to office, you have the personal protective equipment or personal protective supplies, which are expectations that our customers will have when they return to office. We talk about food and beverage and the impact of that. How do you facilitate amenities? How do you work on commuting with shuttle services, increased cab use? Do you have to change your T&E protocols? Allowing digital apps to allow people to access information and identify kind of where they are, but also their commute, at least in our condition, will require people to respond every day initially to how they're feeling and what their symptoms are, and do they feel well enough to come to work, kind of a health check-in. You couple that with some of the changes that are being implemented in our workplace on digital touchless experience, right? People counting apps and sensors to understand who's in work, a check-in app, which we've had for quite some time, which can ask your guests the same series of questions we ask our employees about return to work, a book of space, a digital signage, reminders, and kind of rules of the road, things to follow, all those things that we don't want people to forget, because once you're in the workplace for about 2 hours, you probably become very comfortable in there if you've made the journey, and if you haven't said at the front door, I'm not doing this again, I'm going back home. Once you're in the workplace, you'll say, okay, I'm probably comfortable here, I know the people I'm with, then you may create a comfort level. We want to remind people that it's still an environment where distance is required. In our most of our spaces, we have community managers. This sense of hospitality now will really come into the workplace to answer questions, monitor protocols, help coordinate what people need, fix issues for folks, give them a touch point, while, like, at the last point here, maintaining social distancing and what our offices look like. Now, this slide is not very positive if you think about it in its purest context, but if you think of the components of this, I would say this is our collective opportunity to lead and to drive change and to truly show what workplace is all about and those things that we need to talk about with our executives, with our business leaders, and most importantly, all of our employees. So next point, next slide, please. So if you think of the drivers of change and the sense of remote working or dynamic working, which I like that phrase a lot, dynamic work, this is really what you start to think about as workplace. And the introduction here in true concepts that I believe we will need to embrace are, one is home office up on the upper right. It's no longer something that's managed with an HR and a manager person and we just provide furniture to. Is how do we think about work that goes beyond the four walls of our office buildings, that actually extends into the personal lives of our employees? The other is on the opposite side of the page, what we call consumer mindset in the lower left. What are people thinking and feeling? How do you create social interaction? How do you create social engagement to work? Work was more of a cloud, if you'll allow that expression, more of a cloud as opposed to a physical place. So this migration of work as a service, or workplace as a service as opposed to a place, you start, I think, to see the opportunity we have to address consumer mindset, to include home office as another method of working. Think of it as a remote private office, if you will. The dynamic landscape of dynamic work, really driving collaboration as to why are you at work. The concept of liquid workspace, flexible, driven by hospitality, responds to the needs of groups and business units as opposed to some formula we may have for them. And technology. How do you enact devices? How do you drive a touchless workplace? How do you deliver services seamlessly to folks? And how do you incorporate this into what I believe will become more of a resort-like experience at work as opposed to a prison-like experience at work? And if you think of that dichotomy of prison cells and resort,
that's interesting.
But I make it extreme on purpose. I think you see the opportunity to drive that resort-like experience where people and work come together as one, and you really get to drive change. So I see this as a very opportunistic and very positive way of introducing these components to work, make them inclusionary instead of exclusionary, and really respond to what our employees are looking for based upon a lot of the surveys that are being done today. So that's kind of my view, Ray, on the drivers of change, how positive an environment we can create, the transition from the mode we're in today back to an office environment. An office does not need to mean a physical address. It just has to mean connection and social engagement.
Lots of great points already between you and Armin. I've got quite a few fun notes. I think we're going to have some good dialogue to pick apart those discussions. But we have one more participant in our show today. And actually, because I think we are unfortunately having a little bit of a challenge with technology, but we're gonna make this one a fun experience. Laura, whose voice will now join us, which is actually quite fascinating because much of what Laura does, I think, is going to be beautifully expressed in the slides that she's pushing forward, and her voice will enhance those quite lovely. So, Laura, it's up to you now.
Thank you for having me, and so lovely to be with you, Ray, Armin, and John. I wanted to start off by saying that I am by nature an optimist. I'm a very hopeful person, but I have to humbly admit that this is a challenging time, and I've managed by putting one foot in front of the other. I think that this is something that's really helped me, is to look at things one foot in front of the other. One thing that I wanted to say is that I have been so struck by rare sites of empty cities and streets. It's the very first time globally we've been able to see that, and I realize how little color we build into our environments. And I believe that actually it's the people that are creating the vibrancy. And I want to comment that we perceive life through our senses, and yet we often think of color as something that provides only this visual pleasure, something that sits outside and on the surface. And color's impact, I want to share, is not limited to the visual aspects of color. And this slide is really trying to show you that color is a wavelength, and it is absorbed by your skin. And findings show that changes in the color of an environment result in a drop of blood pressure and a reduction in aggressive behavior in blind as well as sighted students. And simply put, physiologically, we feel color. So if you progress the slide, color actually, it touches all of our senses. It touches all of our senses: smell and taste and touch and sound and sight. And we design our spaces for our senses and our needs, for human connection. But through all my years of working through color, there is one thing that I'm very certain, and that is that color is not relegated to the surface, but it affects our well-being. And that means that we have to think of color not so much as the aesthetic or something that is just visual, but something that actually has to be used with impact and meaning. If you could progress the slide. I believe that these times we are going to need to think about designing for all, and through dignity and change. In 2011, I founded Project Color Core. It was to use the power of color for change, and we actually call it optical optimism, which I think is quite fascinating because it fits so well into what we're talking about. And John, you talk about prisons, changing things from being prison-like into being something that is more hotel or having a more amenity experience. Oftentimes, when I'm working in the environments that I work in with Project Color Core, people describe where the schools are as being more prison-like. 14 million American children attend deteriorating schools. I found that staggering when I started this organization. And the students often wonder why their neighborhoods never get color and they never get any nature. And through our process, we teach color. It is an empowerment process. We engage in conversation with the kids in the community. They become co-designers of their space. And what I believe is that we really need to, now more than ever, rise to create better environments for all. So I wanted to share with you a few before and afters. If you could progress the next slide. I wanted to share with you some of the responses that we get from the kids in the community. We have been told that disruptive behavior, this is the E.C. Reams Academy after we did it. And one of the things the kids said to us is, could you design a place where we feel respected? And when I asked them what that meant, they said, could you design something where people would want to come and visit us, because no one wants to visit us now. And in our engagement, what we were able to show is that disruptive behavior decreases. The kids write us letters about how happy they are and how much more they want to go out and play. We get letters from the community that even during very trying times, that they feel the color and the love spilling out into the streets. And they also say that, we also know that in all of our projects that we have never been tagged, which I find really staggering. What's really amazing to me during this time that's so challenging for all of us as designers is how many of you have stepped up and wanted to become part of Project Color Core. So what I see is extreme generosity. You could go to the next slide. This is a before and after of World Achieve. What was very beautiful about this was that one of the children said, wouldn't it be beautiful if colors could stand all in a row like friends? And so you'll start to see the change in this environment. We are now in 4 cities across the country, which is really quite remarkable to me. And we are growing every day because of the generosity of designers. And one thing that I want to say is that I believe that vulnerability during this time has been a big part of it. We have been using Zoom as this technology tool, but I believe that it actually goes far deeper. I actually believe that it has allowed us to see ourselves as 360 degrees and as really truly human. We're in each other's homes. I've seen more kids run through screens in Zoom. I've heard many, many conversations. And I really believe that it is actually that seeing each other in that way has built empathy and understanding. And it is empathy that's going to allow us to connect to one another. And this pandemic has happened and it's global, but I'm really hopeful that we're going to stand together as one. So thank you.
Laura, that's great, and quite a wonderful emotional response as well. We really appreciate you being able to share this with us. And I know that some of the transitions were a little bit slow, but I think you still get the overall impression as we go through.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to show our connection to people. This is to me the most important thing, right?
I agree. So we may have, I'm going to see if Mary Lee, are you out there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. So there we go. We've got this amazing experience where somehow the guys are on screen and our 2 ladies are off screen. So I guess we're going to ride with that one and see how we can make it for it. Mary Lee, thank you so much for joining us. I know you had a little bit of a technology challenge. It does seem like maybe we got to get John working on this one or some of his team members working on this one. But I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So Chris, if you can just advance the slides. Good morning, good afternoon. So, you know, I think this is a great conversation. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is, you know, I think what we're all have been experiencing is really kind of the initial tactical response to COVID and how do we go back to the office. And I loved the prison versus resort conversation of John. And I think, you know, we're being very cautious, and I know that a lot of companies are working on getting back to the office. And then kind of in the next phase would be, you know, why do you go to the office? And then I think we get to where I really want to go is a more visionary point of view about the office. So if you can keep advancing these, that would be fantastic. So I wanted to really dwell more on the visionary. One of the things I wanted to share, though, is when we first were in shelter in place here in the Bay Area, IA decided to send out a survey just to see how people were feeling and what people's reactions were. And we deployed that in early April. These are some of the findings. We had 1,700 companies respond, so that was quite robust. And the big one was that people were so surprised at how easy it was to pivot. And I think Armin has talked about that, John. You know, I think a lot of companies that felt like it was difficult to work from home or work remote found out it was actually incredibly easy to do. People have loved not commuting. I'm one of them. And that technology, for the most part, has been working pretty good. So, you know, except for, you know, a few glitches here and there. The sort of the meh in the middle there is some felt that it was a little hard to focus or be productive. You know, could be because you have kids at home or the dog is barking at you and it's hard to separate yourself from that, where when you're in the office, it would be easier to do. The downturn was work-life balance, and I think I would say that if we were to send the survey out today, that might be going up a little bit, because I think initially I just heard from a lot of people and a lot of companies that it was just they felt like they were working longer hours and working too much. So if you can advance. This is what you're seeing on the left is that the responses to that survey from the 1,700 companies, primarily in the United States. What you're seeing on the right, though, is we have a partner in Asia with about 17 offices, and they took the same survey and deployed it to their clients as well. About 1,000 responses, just under. And what really surprised us when we looked at the data was that having face-to-face social interactions was the #1 thing that people missed. And so 90% in the US, 85% in Asia. And then the second one was the ability to collaborate with colleagues. People really missed that. Again, 56% versus 58%. And you can go to the next slide. We were really expecting to see maybe some more cultural nuances, and we didn't see that. Those were what surprised you? What did you miss? This is sort of the long term, and both in Asia and the United States, everybody agrees with Armin and John that we need to reassess working from home practices, that is now becoming part of our workplace settings. It's a legitimate place to go to work. And the second one was the investment in communications technologies to support business continuity. That was also pretty highly rated both in the US and Asia. I think the one thing that showed up in the US, the #5, was established processes for enhanced frequency of cleaning. And I'm going to share a little bit about that in a minute. And in Asia, one of the differences was more emphasis on better air quality, which I know they suffer a fair amount with. So if you can go to the next slide. So I think what we're experiencing is a super interesting experience of yesterday, most of our work was done in the office. Today, most of our work is being done from home. And where we really see the world going is it's going to be a hybrid. I think that there are some things you need to do in the office. There's some things you need to do from home. And then there's kind of the gray area in between. And that's going to drive some different thoughts around office workplace designs. If you go to the next slide. So these are just my opinion, but I really think that the office becomes an experiential destination. It's where the most sophisticated technologies reside. It's where information sharing, the face-to-face, it's the coolest place to be. You want to be there. It's also the heart of the culture. We know that being together is what fosters trust, fosters culture. I think one of the things that I've heard through a number of focus groups that I've done is that not only do we miss that face-to-face, but we miss that casual running into one another when we're on Zoom and webinars and all of these different collaboration tools. You can't have sidebars, you can't really read people's body language. We miss all of that. So there is a need for us, I think, to get together, and we love seeing one another and being able to interact. And if you could go to the next one. I also think we need to rethink what the office is doing. I think we've done a fantastic, from a design firm point of view, a fantastic job of creating spaces where people collaborate, and a really lousy job of creating spaces where people can focus. And I think that's the challenge for us, is to find that balance. And I think Armin hit it and John hit it, of this sort of activity-based work style that is not new, but I think it's going to take on more importance as we move forward. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to share a couple of just a little plan and then some visions of the future. So the plan on the left is sort of the traditional benching and some collaboration spaces that are available to those people. And you've got 24 seats. And the plan on the right is more of a neighborhood planning. And I think that COVID response is going to drive more neighborhoods, smaller working environments where it's easier to sort of control your environment. You have more different kinds of seating arrangements. So you can see there's the same number of seats, but they're not all just desk seats. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to be exploring. And if you can go to the next one. And you can just run through these really quickly, Chris. I'm just going to talk above them and you just keep going. These are just different vignettes that we're looking at of, again, I heard the word agility, and I think that's really important, that the workplace needs to be more agile. Not only our office spaces, but our home office spaces also need to be agile. I've found that I've been moving around my house just trying to find different environments to do different things. Looking at planning on the left is sort of that social distancing, but also just looking at how, at some point the vaccine will come and the workspace may become a little bit more densified. So planning for that agility, planning for that flexibility. And I think, to John's point of it's not a prison and it's more of a resort, this is sort of envisioning pie in the sky, what the workplace may look like in the future. And it becomes biophilic with greenery, with natural light. There's a sculptural element where you can wash your hands. There's places that are socially distanced without telling you to socially distance. There's not tape on the floor. There's not arrows. Keep going. I think there's just a couple more of these. And we envision that the cleaning crew becomes part of the staff. You see them, they're visible. Maybe there's a cleaning crew help desk, just like there's a genius bar. Now there's a cleaning crew bar. That's where all the stuff is kept. You get somebody to help you clean a desk, clean a conference room, whatever that might be. They're very visible. We love them. And I love this little sketch. And keep going. And maybe in the future that goes back to becoming some other kind of tech bar. This is a reimagined workplace where this is a single floor, obviously, but it has louvered ceiling elements for natural air intake. It has UV light. There's just this wonderful underfloor air plenum. So we know that clean air is going to be, it's always important, but it's even more so that the patterns in the carpet may help enforce sort of a social distancing thought without, again, tape all over the place. Lots of elements of nature, lights, views, very optimistic workplace. And food, which is something we're having a lot of discussions about, is maybe it's a touchless locker and you can see into the kitchen where people are preparing your food, but it's all clean, and you go to the locker and you pick up your pre-plated food and it's all very clean and healthy and wonderful. Or there's digital food trucks that come with an app, and you order through your app to get your food there. And then this was our genderless restrooms, no touch doors, don't have to worry about anything, and it's a clean world. I think that's where this ends. So thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Mary Lee.
That's cool.
We always end on restrooms. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, if there's one thing that everybody on this call can take away, I think, John, you've coined the phrase about it's not a prison.
Yeah.
It's great to hear that. Well, guys, team, I'm really happy that we were able to share a little bit about what we're thinking. And obviously, I think there are some really intriguing things that we can pick out of this conversation and potentially start to think about. And I'd like to pull the thread on a couple of those ideas. And obviously, we're going to preface this by, look, we put my questions on the screen. Haha. But actually, this is only the feint. We're going to maybe talk about these, but I also want to probe on several of the things that we discussed. So one thing I've heard very consistently out of several of you is this concept, again, of really the strength of us returning to the office. I think that is not that's without question at this point. We know that we will have a place that we want to go to. But what's intriguing to me is this idea of what workplace could be. And again, something I really picked out of that is this idea of workplace as service. So when we think about what that represents and the shifts that can come forward from that, so that workplace is not the negative aspect of what we want to do, but it actually becomes something that is potentially very desirable about where we want to go. How do we continue to think about that? How do we continue to push that forward? And I think, John, I want to touch on you for a second here, because I think you really started to pick up on that idea in a very powerful way. And I'd love to hear more about how you're unfolding that, or how would that unfold within your spaces?
Sure. We had already been deploying for the past 4 years the concept, and I was glad to see it, of an activity-based workplace, which is really about a flexible, hospitality-aligned place to come to work. And we had made the conversion from cubicles and offices to unassigned and open workspace that was more about based upon what you did than what your title was. And that was a huge cultural shift. And we got through that actually very easily. And I think it's because we created spaces that people actually enjoyed using. So you could actually get up and take over a room for a day or two or a week. And we actually allowed that. Like, that was sacrilege, but we allowed people to actually own something temporarily. To me, the concept is you have to create the pull to the workplace as opposed to the push. And the push has been, the finance director saying, all my people have to show up every day. Or the supervisor who says, all my folks need to be in front of me so I can manage them. That's not exactly a very engaging way where people will approach coming to work. They already come with a negative connotation that I have to be here. We want to build places where people want to be there. Like, the social engagement is huge. Social interaction fosters culture. So culture is important. Culture fosters social engagement. It can also create distancing between people if it's a bad culture. So I think, this whole idea that we're building on, this resort concept, is the idea of, which, Mary Lee, you spoke to elegantly, and Laura, was, color in the space, plants in the space, things you don't expect, things you'd only expect to see on vacation, places to go, this whole spa-like experience without it being a spa. But this idea of we have to solve for fitness centers, right? That's an issue to be solved for. We have to figure that out. There are a lot of things we have to figure out in the short term, and then I think in the long term as well. So this idea of personal space, I think, is getting even more attraction. But people should want to come to work and think of that as probably the destination of choice for when they want to collaborate and be with the team members, and then maybe use work remotely or work at home, either based upon the way that they work, the reason that they work, or the type of work that they do. So I think there's to be an evolution of that, and everyone will have a different opinion. Should the call centers stay at home? Should the home-based agents now be 85% as opposed to 15% of a population? I think each company has to make a decision for themselves as to what actually works for their culture. But this idea of pull people to the office because they want to be there as opposed to have to be there because it serves their needs, it takes care of them socially, it engages them with the company, and it's just a great place to be, I think, is critically important going forward.
I think that makes an awful lot of sense. Armin, actually, in full disclosure, I know you and I have had a little bit of a conversation about some of these ideas previously, but again, pulling apart one of the other phrases that we've heard today, this concept of liquid workplace, working for a firm that really is known as a technology organization. It's a true technology company. I think, your firms like yours in the past have been looked at as sort of the bellwethers of what happens in the industry, and we're the first to move towards some of these more dynamic spaces. Now, if we think about workspace as liquid, how do you see firms like yours continuing that level of transition? What happens in workspace now that might push it to a new level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and John hit it on the head too. I think different industries and different work practices are going to kind of change and adapt over time at varying paces. I think fundamentally, though, tech is going to lead the way. We've generally been on the leading edge of change. We're very adaptable and nimble and progressive in that sense. The thing I think about, and similar to some of John's initiatives, is we've been working on dynamic work for quite a while before COVID happened. And I think about, well, what were the foundational reasons as to why we were working on dynamic work? And those are because these like major macro trends that we were already starting to witness with the workforce. We had macroeconomic issues in major urban environments where cost of living was super expensive for individuals. 14 of the 15 top tier markets in the world were all experiencing a housing bubble where cost of living is rising faster than wages. That obviously places a huge onus on, individuals required to come to the office as it relates to their commutes. We had major demographic changes that were happening in our workforce. So at Okta, again, a kind of a younger tech company, 60% of our workforce today is millennials. Gen Z is entering the workforce for the first time. By 2025, the vast majority of the entire workforce will be made up of millennials. So we need to think about what their preferences are as it relates to the employers that they choose to work for. And, thinking about them, the younger generation being technologically native, always on mobile first types of generation, there's a desire for them to have flexibility. And it's not just them, it's the Gen Xers as well. I'm a Gen Xer. I've always desired to have that level of flexibility. Yes. And then now, for the first time, you also have a tech productivity stack, which everyone is very, very familiar with in COVID, in the COVID world, that you could do the work that you used to do behind a corporate firewall on the corporate network from anywhere in the world securely. You've got Zoom, Office 365, Slack, Box, Okta. So there's these trends that were already in place. COVID accelerated everything, right? And I told the company when we were starting to transition to this method of work that my expectation was in the next 5 years, most every company in our industry is gonna have this flexible type of approach to work. And then COVID happened. It created the world's largest work from home experiment, and and so the doubters were those managers that were not too sure of how they can manage their employees if they're not in the same location as they had been before. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind because those trends are still present and they're going to continue to get stronger and stronger in the coming years. And so I think we have to adapt and create environments that support those trends. And what are those things that support those trends? It's flexibility, but it is an investment. It's flexibility in where you work geographically, but also what's really important is the offices still are that cultural connective tissue of an organization. So when you are in the office, developing different types of environments that drive that flexibility. So it's not about coming to your desk, having a dedicated desk, and sitting there all day. We actually have done surveys. 30% of our desks are occupied at any given point during the day, but the vast majority of our footprints have been developed for desk spaces. Doesn't sound very efficient in our planning. So and then similarly, 80% of our employees do their heads down, real productive work away from the desk. So how do we develop an environment now where we're actually less dependent on structural desks, standardized desks, and provide people with different types of environments that they could still be productive in throughout the day? We call those kind of alternative seating. It's like your flex type of seating areas that have power and data that are capable of getting work done. And really then supporting the rest of the organization as they become more flexible geographically with more and more offices, and you start creating this ecosystem, a network almost, where people flow in and out of those office spaces as they need. And it's less about a requirement from the manager, but more about the desire of the employee. And so you create these experiential types of centers where employees can come in, meet with each other, develop those personal relationships, but also you can create environments where customers and prospects can come in, experience your product, become evangelists for your products, and go back and and thus kind of increase the value of your company. So I think the liquidity is a huge part of it. It's got benefits from driving a more engaged workforce that's really centered on personal relationships, but it's also supporting this desire for the workforce in terms of flexibility. And then lastly, just being a business driver, enabling employees to bring in customers and really interact with the products that companies build.
I can really see that in a very powerful way in the way that space can be shaped moving forward. And as a fellow Generation Xer, since there are so few of us out here, apparently, we get squished in the middle. Everybody wants to talk about the millennials. But I really do feel like the liquidity that you're talking about, and again, that's another term that I will definitely take away from this particular dialogue, that sense of flexibility really has such amazing optimism, right? Because you have the ability to do things you're talking about, to engage either with external partners, internal partners, creating that destination, that sense of space. And Laura, even though I can't see you, so don't worry, I've been thinking about you though, because again, thinking about your discussion and the focus that you have on really how environment affects that. I mean, I think in your last couple of slides, you're especially focusing on that idea of how environment can affect that sense of creativity. And now, we're all quote unquote isolated for the last several years, I think it is at this point. But I'd like to believe, and I am starting to, in the conversation we're having already, feel like there's an explosion of creativity that's starting to happen, that people are really thinking, and that people are, in fact, enjoying this time in some ways because there aren't the distractions of daily life. And so therefore, I can really think about something new. In the work that you're doing, how do you see that element of creativity coming forward now during this period of isolation? And what do you think is going to happen as we exit it?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to say was that this fluidity, I think it's been a time of questioning what we did as habit and replacing it with intention. This whole idea of why we need to be where we need to be. Do we need to get on a plane? Do we need to be at work? Everything that we're doing now has this greater sense of a shared vision and purpose. And to be really frank with you, I see this time for me less about creativity and more about responsibility. What it's really provoked in me is this sense of service. And how do we look at our workplaces as something connected to a bigger sense of community? Who are we responsible to? We're responsible to our coworkers, we're responsible to our families, to our lives, but outside of that, in growing communities and creating a bigger change, I think about that a lot more. And I think that the thing that happened to me during COVID, this is very, personal, is that I struggled in the beginning because I felt that I wasn't able to connect and give back. And I thought a lot about how we could do that with the kinds of powers that we have. I mean, just when I look at, Armin, John, Mary Lee, like what they're doing in terms of environments. I'm of course thinking inside the environment, but outside of the environment, I think those types of gifts, that people have, I think that we are trying to think of ways that we can engage beyond our everyday life and impact our society as a whole. And that's kind of where, that's where my focus has been, is how can we be of service? And so I love everything that I've seen, because I'm a very small office, but the offices and the way you speak of the office, I would go to your offices. I really, I love what you're doing so much. And I think of color, materials, and finishes that way, to be of service, the humanistic connection. I do think color is going to be more important now than it ever has, but I'm also thinking of it beyond. How do we change the prison-like environments that we just relegate to communities and make them better so that we feel a sense of equity?
I think that's, and I think what you're saying too is so incredibly important, especially in the scenario that most of us are also dealing with in the social aspect of what's happening right now across our country, and the the change that needs to happen out there and the effect that it's having, quite frankly, in pushing COVID down and actually allowing us to think about, like you just said, how do we continue to affect others? So I really appreciate that viewpoint. We do actually have a few questions coming in from the audience. And in fact, Mary Lee, I haven't forgotten you, I promise. In fact, of course, exactly. It's really exciting to see the work that you were able to share a little bit in the thought processes that IA is pushing in thinking about a lot of the dialogue we're having today around, again, the liquidity of office space, as my new favorite term, John's anti-prison methodology, and what workplace can actually mean. So the question from the audience is, has IA started thinking about maybe some of the economics of what those redesigned offices might be? That there's a great deal of amazing imagination that's gone into those sketches. But is there, what's the thought about the reality behind them?
I think we're working with some global clients right now on just that. So they have built environments, and what they are doing is looking at how to do that pivot of the new world where it isn't just some percentage of their population comes into the office when they are in huge towers all around the world. And so they're looking, we're doing developing a beta site on one of the floors to test out some of those new ideas that I shared with you. They're looking at first, how do you alter the space without using a hammer, and maybe it's furniture changes. So that's a fairly, I mean, I know that's still an economic proposition, but that's where we're starting, is looking at that. And then that's sort of like phase one. What we have different scenarios that we're developing, and another one is, okay, so how do you start to surgically alter the built environment as well? So I don't think it's like throw out the old and come in with the new. You have to be smart, and I think you just have to test what you have and see how you can push it and with what kind of monies are available.
Absolutely. No, I think the economics will always come to the table. I think that
Absolutely.
good design takes those into account. I mean, that's a key part of what happens. And I actually want to pull on that thread just a little bit, because another question that came in from the audience, and I'm thinking about the gentleman on the screen, Armin and John, who both have in their title that SVP around real estate. And so the question from the audience is, what are the new success metrics that you might be putting into place to measure what the office means to people moving forward?
Yeah, I can start, John. It's interesting that traditional metrics we used to model our real estate needs from are going to be thrown out the window, right?
Absolutely.
When we had employees coming back, and having dedicated desks, we had a figure for that. We had a figure for how many conference rooms in a space. We had a figure for how large our common areas and our cafes needed to be, what type of other kind of programmed amenities needed. All that's changed. For us, we think about things now from a ratio perspective. How many people do we have in a market, and how many seats do we actually need? And the seats are not just the kind of standardized desks, but it's all the different work points that can be in a quote unquote flexible type of workplace. In any case, whatever that metric is for that organization, again, like tech is probably going to be a little bit more different than some other traditional industries, or if you have lab space and those kinds of things. So you have to be cognizant of that. But I think in any case, the spaces are becoming more and more efficient in the future. So I think about, how does that relate to the current portfolio that we've got? How much space, how many more people can we go and support with the existing space? Where does that create opportunities for us to open up in markets where we're not today? For us, it's going to be somewhere in the tune of 50% efficiency gains.
Got it. John, from your perspective, what metrics are you going to either put into place or be tasked with achieving?
We've always used, I've never been a proponent of pure real estate metrics like dollars per square foot or seats per square foot. I've never subscribed to that because I always felt that was very impersonal
Absolutely.
and really had nothing to do with the customer. It had only to do with physical space. So we've always used two core measures. One is utilization of buildings. Do people come to the office? And after we've made the workplace changes, we've measured the change of utilization of space, which meant how many people are you expecting to come, then how many people actually do. And the second is we survey our employees quarterly and ask them about the satisfaction survey as to how productive the space is for them. So that takes on even more importance going forward. And I think if you base your design on what people's expectation or delivering productivity to the employees when they come to work and what experience do they have when they get there, satisfaction is a huge one. Utilization is another one. Are they actually showing up? And then your amenities get measured as well in your large corporate campus buildings. The difficulty has been the smaller buildings, right? The single floor spaces where if the manager doesn't show up, probably 60% of the office doesn't show up. And that has nothing to do with how well you designed the space. That's a cultural thing, right? So it's really, I think going forward is going to be, who do we expect to come to work based upon what they do, not based upon what the manager says. So I do expect our call centers will go from 15% home-based agent to something north of 70% home-based agent. I expect that to be a permanent shift. So how do we accommodate that? How do we accommodate business continuity? How do we care for that when they're all working at home? So that becomes a whole new assignment. And how satisfied do we gauge them as working from home? That's going to be very interesting to ask them, because we don't control that space. So I think that's something to think about. But if you think about the experience you're looking to deliver, I think we'll have better quality space. I think at the end of the day, we'll have less space. How much less, I don't know. Because I also think per person, we have to allocate more space. So it's something we're still working on, but the space has to now respond to the individual as opposed to the individual responding to the space. And I think that's a fundamental shift, which I think we've been doing in parts and pieces, but I think that's going to be core to determining what is good design. What is good design? Do people actually appreciate what they're getting, and will they use it and see it as productive space?
Absolutely. Great commentary. Well, as usual with these types of discussions, we have managed to go to the end of our time rather rapidly. I do want to thank everyone for attending, especially my thanks personally to Armin, to John, to Laura, and to Mary Lee. And Chris, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ray.
So much, and thank you for such a great discussion, everybody. So we do want to let you know we've got episode 12 in the series coming next Wednesday at 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time. That will be going over re-entry into the workplace and visitor management. And then, as all of these episodes, we do post them to our Coronavirus Resource Center. So shortly after we end here, we'll have the full recording and the slide deck available. So go to ifma.org/coronavirus. Huge thank you to all the panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insights. And also thank you to the audience for your incredible questions. We'll see everybody back here 10 o'clock Wednesday for the next episode. Thanks.